All right, so the time being 9 o'clock, I think we can go ahead and get started. Andrew, Brandy, and Jared, you should be able to take control. I will
All right.
turn it over to you. Did you want me to read the brief intro for your session, or you guys want to go right into it?
Sure, go for it, Noah.
Okay, great. All right, so our first session, as I said, is called New Meets Old: Additions to Historic Buildings and Infill Development. Um, we are joined by um, Andrew Cushion, who up until recently, Andrew, you're going to tell us your new title, was the Community Preservation Services Manager at the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. Brandy Laughlin, the Preservation Planning and Development Coordinator at the New Hampshire Division of Historic Resources, DHR, within the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and Jared Goulame. Jared, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Apologies if I am not. Who is an AIA and NCARB certified architect and associate partner and principal architect at Ms. Miziazik Turnpin Architects. Again, I'm sure I just butchered that. My apologies, Jared. We should
It's
have
all
rehearsed that
good.
part in advance. Um, just for the background for folks, I'm just going to read the description and I'll turn it over to you guys. So, new construction in historic neighborhoods and additions to historic buildings can be designed and executed sympathetically into great success. Infill development can keep villages vibrant and strengthen tax bases. New additions help our historic buildings stay accessible, relevant, and useful. The opposite is also true. Poor design and construction can have long-lasting consequences. This session will discuss and illustrate how to apply the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation to additions and new construction. Take it away,
Right.
guys.
All right. So look, we have an introduction slide, so we can we'll correct some spelling mistakes. We just wanted to put Noah on the spot a little bit, really test him out on a Saturday morning. Brandy, do you want to start kind of diving in a little bit more of what you do at the Division of Historical Resources?
Sure. So I oversee several programs at DHR. The busiest one I oversee is the Federal Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program. So many of you may have seen this program at work in your communities. This is when buildings are rehabilitated for income producing uses, and those buildings can receive a 20% tax credit, or I should say that the owner, the person who does the project, receives a 20% tax credit, and that is 20% of the cost of the rehabilitation expenditures to do the project. So the most common examples of those projects around here are mill buildings converted into apartments. Many of those around the state utilize this program, as well as the Colonial Theater in Laconia, which Jared worked on, and you'll see we're using as an example later on. The other programs I oversee are the Certified Local Government Program, which many of you may be part of, and that is a program that can provide grants to communities that are certified local governments to help with preservation survey, planning, training, that kind of thing. And then the final program I oversee is preservation planning. And essentially, I'm just a resource for folks who maybe have policy or local historic district ordinance, questions. I try to connect people with other communities. And just in general answer questions related to preservation planning. I also have a little background in municipal planning. I did spend 5 years as the assistant planner in the city of Laconia as well. So that is my background.
Great. We'll make the Laconia segue to Jared.
I'm Jared Gilmet. I am a architect at the Laconia-based architecture firm Mashashik Turpin, where we focus on residential work as well as smaller commercial type work. Brandy mentioned the Colonial Theater, so we do a fair amount of historic preservation and restoration work as well. And I'm excited to be part of the conference today.
Great. And then again, I'm Andrew Cushing with the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance, although I am transitioning out as I become more involved in Mascoma Valley Preservation, which is a regional nonprofit group in the Mascoma Valley of New Hampshire. I'm actually reporting in from my town in Grafton, so if my internet holds up, I pray I can get through this presentation. But MVP focuses on kind of rural vitality, and that could be a rehab of a historic building or potentially some new construction. So with that, I want to start with this. If you can imagine that you are on a historic district commission or maybe some land use board that is going and monitors a historic neighborhood, and someone comes in and says, I want to build this house. We feel like it's New Englandy, right? It's got clapboards or mimics clapboards. It's got these gables. It has shutters. The windows have simulated panes, and they feel like it is appropriate for the neighborhood. And if you were in, say, Charlestown's historic district, which has a lot of buildings that span from, say, the early 1800s to the Victorian era, you would probably say, this is not a very good fit. It might be New Englandy, but boy, it emphasizes the garage over the main entrance for pedestrians. The gables are fronting the road. But in a couple of years, if there's a 1990s cul-de-sac subdivision that is now a historic district, that property might be a good fit because context matters. And we really want to dive into kind of the nuances of new construction and appropriate designs on historic buildings, because I know a lot of times this can feel very subjective, or maybe even verges into the kind of, well, I like it. And we want to make sure that you can make defensible decisions when these projects come to your HDC or land use board, to make sure that the new addition or the new construction is kind of improves or fits in with the neighborhood, and doesn't, like we said in our intro, maybe cause some problems that in 50 years you're going to be hoping, boy, that building should be gone. So a lot of these decision making can be traced back to what we call the Secretary of the Interior standards, in this case for rehabilitation. And we're going to dive into 4 of the 10 items in the standards. So first one is a property shall be used. Oh, actually, Brandy, do you start here? Yeah, you do. So Brandy's going to dive in. Brandy deals with this all the time, and she's going to be a really good speaker for this. I'm sorry, Brandy, it's Saturday morning. And you're muted.
Yeah, haven't had that second cup of coffee yet. Okay. So thank you, Andrew. I think context is one of the most important things for everyone to keep in mind as, you know, the overarching umbrella when they're looking at additions to buildings or new construction or infill in a historic district. And then under that umbrella, we can put these standards. So the Secretary of the Interior standards for treatment of historic properties actually has 4 sets of standards. What we're going to look at today are rehabilitation. Other standards include reconstruction, preservation, and restoration, excuse me. But for historic districts rehabilitation, for historic districts and, you know, most work that folks are doing on their building, rehabilitation are the prime set of standards that we want to look at. They are the most flexible, and while also allowing you to be sensitive to the historic character of buildings. So these are nationally used standards. They are laid out in federal policy language. The National Park Service uses these standards for most of its programs, granting programs, the tax credit program, various other programs. It's the professional and federal standard that we generally use. So we usually recommend that folks on a local level also look to them if they maybe are having trouble interpreting their local ordinances, or if they just need some guidance to help make a decision. So you can see there are 10 standards. 1, 4, 9, and 10 are the ones that are most applicable to new edition and oh, is the screen not sharing?
The screen should be sharing. If anybody else is having an issue, please put it in the chat. It's all showing up fine on our end.
Okay.
So
Tim responded screen share.
yeah, so if Tim,
Okay.
I'm not seeing anybody else chime in the chat. Working for me says somebody else. So Tim,
Hmm.
I would suggest that you try signing out and signing back in again. If you're having trouble seeing the screens, I unfortunately suspect it may be a issue with your computer that you're viewing it on. And my apologies. Go
Thank
ahead,
you,
Brenda.
Noah. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So again, 1, 4, 9, and 10, I'm going to go through each of those here. Standard 1 says that a property shall be used for its historic, sorry, the chat keeps popping up, for its historic purpose or be placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building and its site and environment. So here we've got two very different buildings that had two very different historic uses, obviously different sizing, scale, layouts, all, couldn't be more different. And you can see how the new uses are really compatible with the historic character of the original or historic use. So the Brookline Public Library here on the left is a former church. And so churches are known for their open worship or gathering spaces. So the kind of uses that you want to see in a building like this would be ones that kind of lend themselves to not cutting the building up into different interior spaces, not inserting floors. Maybe it's a double height ceiling and in order to maximize space, you might want to insert a second floor. That might not be the most compatible use. In this particular instance, it was turned into a library, which I think is a very compatible use. Libraries, tend to have kind of open circulation stacks, and they're meant to be community gathering spaces. On the right, we have the China Mills. These are typical mill buildings that we see here in New England, and they really lend themselves well to apartments nowadays because you have these very long open spaces for the equipment and the manufacturing process to go down the line. They're now great and perfectly proportioned in most instances for a double loaded corridor where you have a hallway down the center and then apartments on either side. And those apartments get plenty of light and ventilation for code reasons with all of the windows. The windows were put there historically because there was no electricity, so you needed daylight. But they work out really well for apartments. So again, these, you really want to think about what use you can put in a building that requires the least amount of change to the character defining features. Here we have the former library in Jackson. It is very cute, but very small, and they needed more space. So rather than adding an addition, they built a separate new library, but they kept this library. And what they did was they decided to use it as community space. Again, it's, open kind of circulation area in a library really lent itself to an open space for community space. Standard 4, most properties change over time. Those changes that have acquired significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. Here on the left, we have the old historic photo of the Kendrick Woodhouse Upper Valley Music Center in Lebanon. As you can see, the front porch has been changed pretty significantly from the historic photograph to the current photograph. On the left, we have a much more intricate double height stick style porch. And then on the right, we have a colonial revival porch that's probably from the early 20th century. So this is the current condition that it's in. So where folks might say, well, it did used to have this intricate porch, and like this is newer, it's not original. We would say, well, it may not be quote unquote original, but it is historic. It's part of its history. It's part of the changes over time. Here in New England, we are particularly thrifty, and reusing a building and changing it to suit our needs or maintenance needs was a huge one. Why we see changes is pretty common. And those changes really do become historic in their own right after a certain, period of time. And it's important to recognize that as well. A lot of folks think if something isn't original that it's not significant, but it can be. Here we have a house in Shelburne. You can see it was a much more simplified kind of farmhouse style building, and then they added this Second Empire Tower. If this was to come before your board today, you might say, "Oh no, that's definitely not compatible, that tower." And I would agree with you. However, this happened historically. This was added historically, so I think at this point in time we could consider part of its evolution. Again, another example, you can see the wing or the L here that you can see on the left is an older part of a meeting house. And then the multi-story addition there on the right is an Italianate style addition onto the front of the meeting house. If this were to go to a local historic district in the 1850s, maybe when this addition was built, they might have said, oh no, that's not compatible at all. But looking at it from today's lens, again, it's part of the evolution of the building. Standard 9 says that new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. This is really the key one with a lot of the words and language you're going to hear over and over from us and from others, where we're talking about massing, size, scale, features, compatibility, but differentiated. These are all key components of applying the standards. So here we've got town offices in Boscawen. It was a former school. You can see there's an addition to the back there in the 1950s or 60s. And again, going back to that acquired historic significance, we may have looked at this building 20 or 30 years ago and thought, that's really not compatible. That's, it's not significant. But over time, it may have gained its own sense of significance. Even though looking at it now, we might say, yeah, that's definitely not compatible. But it still shows an evolution of the building, of its use, maybe of teaching philosophies, of education standards, things like that. Here in New London, this is a drawing of an addition from the 1960s. So here is where we talk about differentiating but being compatible. And this is definitely differentiated. I don't know that I would say it's compatible. It's, the asymmetry here is really at odds with the kind of formal symmetry of the church. Andrew, this one, did you have anything specifically you wanted to say about this one? I know this was one that you picked.
Well, just that it's kind of a wild example of kind of a mid-century modern expression of late federal architecture, I guess. I think what's interesting about something, if you want a design to be compatible, in this case, it seems like the architect was really trying to put his own stamp on the design. And Jared will say it can be hard as an architect to balance the desire to have a legacy, but also to be respectful of the historic building. And in this case, the design did not hold up. A lot of this addition was demolished, built maybe 15 or 20 years ago, in more of a kind of a traditional style. So part of this 1960s edition remains, but it did not stand the test of time. And you could argue philosophically that that was because it didn't reach really the 50-year significance mark, and we didn't have enough time to really think about how important maybe a 1960s design was. But at any rate, I would say it's probably not compatible.
That's
we
a good
could do a
point.
poll. We could do a poll on that.
I don't know that we need to pull this one. I think I would say I think this is a good example though to talk about how not everything has acquired significance, right? Just because something has reached that 50-year age, doesn't mean you don't need to look at it critically. So in this particular instance, maybe you would look at it and say, no, it might not be super compatible, but it is part of the building's evolution. It's representative of the growth that the church was experiencing at the time, or whatever the case might be. Or maybe you look into the history and you say, nah, it was just kind of like an addition that they needed, and it just didn't really, they didn't need it eventually, and it's not a big deal. So it really, again, we're going back to context, like Andrew discussed in the beginning, and you always need to look at each building as an individual case. Here we've got the Bristol Library. You can see here on the upper left a historic photograph of the historic library, and then directly to the right of that is a rendering of a proposed addition, which is pretty, I would say, contrasting to the historic library. And that was not approved, or okay, Andrew can jump in here. That was not approved, I believe, by the HDC. And what they ended up with was the addition down here on the bottom. So in this particular instance, it certainly is more compatible as far as design and scale. Andrew, if you want to jump in, you're welcome to here.
Yeah, I would say that the original architects heard it should be differentiated, it should be compatible, subservient, and so they came up with this addition that spoke for the era of the new construction, and the community just said, boy, we just do not like that. And this is going to be one of those philosophical discussions where the addition that ended up happening is kind of a mirror of the historic building, which is according to the standards is a no-no. But I would give this addition an A, because I think Brandy might give it a lower grade, but ultimately I think it's what the community has a stomach for. And sometimes these academic discussions don't land very well in the reality of the world. So we're going to be trying to balance and provide nuance to all of these strains of discussion. So
I think that's a good opportunity. Also, thank you, Andrew, for me to jump in and say that even amongst professionals, we can have differing opinions. It's very common that I send something to the Park Service for a tax credit program that I think is problematic or okay, and they think the opposite. So, not everything is super black and white, and it's very common for that to be, a point of discussion, for things to be kind of hashed out between people. So if you're at your meeting and you've got, many differing opinions on something, that is not unusual. It is totally okay. I mean, you still do need to work together to decide what you all can agree on. But don't think that you're struggling as a board just because you may have differing opinions. Again, it's really common. A lot of this is subjective, and sometimes you have to, take a step back again, look at that context. Look at, the fact that in a local historic district, or, with a particular, even with an individual building, you're not trying to stop change. You're just trying to manage it in a way that you think is appropriate. And, what folks think is appropriate can differ, so you got to find a middle ground. So I just wanted to kind of put that disclaimer out there that we know that this is not easy, and we know for a fact that not everybody thinks the same way, because even amongst those of us who've had the same exact training and same exact education, we all think differently. But you can find an answer together, and hopefully today will help. All right, standard 10 is specifically about new additions and adjacent or related new construction. So here we might be talking about infill in a historic district, or maybe in a historic complex. So these new additions and adjacent or related new construction shall be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. So a lot of people refer to this as reversibility. It's important to note that reversibility is not the only standard that needs to apply. It doesn't mean you can put a little hyphen on and then put, a giant, very incompatible addition. It just means that the addition shouldn't affect the building in such a way that if it were to be removed, it wouldn't significantly damage the historic building. The addition still does need to be compatible. Just because it is reversible, or the change, just because it's reversible, doesn't mean it's meets all the standards. So here we can see an earlier edition that was connected with a hyphen, and then later on it was removed, and it's done no damage to the historic district, building. And this is why we do like to see hyphens, which we'll get into as we talk about additions. But we do like to see hyphens when possible with additions, because it differentiates the building and sets it apart. But it also can just make it easier in the future if things are to change. All right, so the rules of thumb. This is just kind of everything distilled down. Specifically in this case, this is for additions. We've got a few more later on for infill. So here we're going to talk about subservient. Additions should be smaller than the historic building. They should be set back from the main facade or the rooftop, depending on where they are. They should be compatible, meaning they respond to the historic volume or design, but they don't compete with it specifically. They should be differentiated and discernible, so different enough to read as a new addition or a building of its own time. And reversible, this again is the one that we just touched on. And I want to also just note quickly that this is, size, scale, massing, design, materials. All of these things can come into play with all of these, all four of these topics, right? So keep that in mind. And I think Jared is going to jump in here on additions.
Sure. All right. So as Brandy was just kind of outlining those rules of thumb, a lot of that is also present in the preservation briefs that the National Park Service publishes. These are documents, articles that they've published fully accessible on their website for download and reference. Me personally and professionally, I use these really all the time as we dive into historic restoration, rehabilitation projects, or even assessments of historic buildings, which are really critical documents in supporting the rehabilitation efforts, as well as helping buildings and property owners achieve grants and other funding. These preservation briefs help provide some of this guidance and outline do's and don'ts, techniques, and pieces that have been successful in past projects. Brief number 14 here is really just kind of diving into the additions, and again works through a lot of what Brandy has just talked through, and those kind of distilled 4 points, that additions want to be compatible. They want to be distinguishable, though, and still be able to work with the historic fabric, letting the building's history still remain the dominant feature, but also allowing the property to be further developed and refined for the current time. Buildings change over the age of their lifespan, and so does their use. Kind of outlined some, like a church might become a library, or the mill buildings become apartments, and how do we work these additions to still achieve functionality for the structure. So we got a couple examples here that we wanted to just kind of walk through as points here. So the image on the left shows the rear portion of Bethlehem's town hall and fire station component. The image on the right takes on kind of an after picture. So the property needed to enhance and improve its accessibility. So an elevator and egress stair needed to be integrated onto the property. So it was taking over a zone where there was a previous fire escape that was attached to the building. You can see on the image on the left, kind of through access through a dormered window. And the new scope of work looked at maintaining a similar form to the building, so keeping the massing very compatible, but also pushing it back some from the edge of the historic corner so that you still see that corner, a similar palette of materials, but still different enough that you could tell it was an addition added onto it. The Colonial Theater in Laconia here. So this, as Brandy mentioned, went through a massive rehabilitation project, opening back up in 2021. The project itself comprised of the restoration of the historic theater, but also of 4 Main Street retail components, as well as 2 floors of residential units. And so access to the residences was a part of the project of how do we provide access, elevator, and all of that. So image on the left is the original kind of historic layout and forms of the building, where you see this kind of inset alley with a single-story addition. And the image on the right is what has been done now. So still maintaining that alley. This addition did not come out to the full street front, but it kept back from that face, creating a little courtyard. And the addition then had access primarily on this side for the residences. I know somebody just raised their hand. I'm not sure how we tackle
So
that.
unfortunately, we are not. We do have a fairly small amount of people in here, but we are not going to unmute people, or we're not able to unmute people for people to take themselves off mute. So if you have a raising your hand to ask a question, I'd ask that you please put it in the chat box for Jared, Brandy, and Andrew.
Thank you, Noah. So, this again was also looking at, okay, we're on a main street. The historic property fills the entire property's footprint. And how do we achieve an addition that helps with the restrooms for the public theater use? How do we achieve a volume that provides access to the upper floors? So it was really kind of working this infill zone for the addition, but still introducing materials that worked with the historic fabric, but also allowed it to be different and kind of differentiate itself. Changing scale completely here now to kind of a residential scope project. We see on the right side of the image the original kind of cape of the house. And the homeowners here they had a growing family and growing storage needs, as most everybody tends to have. And so, original entry to the home was from the front door, and they had a little side door that entered right into the kitchen. There was no mudroom, there was no storage, and the kitchen was really pretty small for the growing family. So it was looking at ways to create a complementary volume and addition that fit on the property, that could fit into the context of the neighborhood, while still not necessarily disrupting the original form of the house. They were very much attached to the home itself. They didn't want to move, but they had a lot of history and memories at the property. So how do we kind of create this addition simply to have kind of a side entry with an expanded kitchen and then garage at the back, which did not exist beforehand. So kind of understanding that we could still have an addition that has the same siding, same finishes, but its form allows it to read as addition and not original. That kind of then segues us into rooftops a little bit, and the preservation briefs also outline this content where rooftops, they can get tricky. And how do you define a historic building with going up? Oftentimes there's property boundaries that we can't go out laterally, we have to go vertically. And so when we have to do that, what are key areas that we should be evaluating through the design and through the acceptance of them into historic districts or our communities? And so, a lot of times those same four key points, the discernibility, the compatibility, reversibility, those all really still play into effect here. And that we don't want the addition, if you're going on the roof, to come right to the edge of the existing footprint. Keep it back from the edge. That helps with visibility, especially if you're on a main street. And really evaluating the height. We don't necessarily want to put a 5-story addition on top of a 2-story volume. It's just, the scale is going to look weird. It's going to take over the entire property and just be really out of place. So how do you evaluate that critically? So a few examples specifically of rooftops. This one we can say is not ideal, not successful, and not really sure what the goal was other than trying to get maybe some head height in this upper zone of the structure. So a interesting creation of a dormer / rooftop bump. The form doesn't really work. It's not overly compatible with the existing structure. Yes, it's pushed back from the front face, but it's so odd and stands out so differently from the existing structure that it makes your eye drawn more to it and question it a lot more. This Institute of the Arts, you can see the historic brick volume and then a 1-story addition at the roof level. Utilizing very different material palette, it allowed it to stand out, but also work with the tones of the gray and the brick work together. It certainly is more expressive and artistic, but that's also in a way fitting for the use of the building. So that type of mindset analysis should also be taken into account through the design and review of a structure like this. How does it work with the building's use and function, providing additional interior space, but also helping with pedestrian circulation outside, maintenance, introducing roof overhangs and covering at the doors. Yes, the odd shed dormer was in Farmington. That was this one. And I know, a lot of us are looking at these buildings on paper and in 2D, sometimes certainly in 3D models, but 2D construction drawings are certainly still extremely prevalent. And so how do we evaluate those buildings and try and see what they're going to become when we're looking at them in black and white 2D drawings? And that's where, from an architectural perspective, I need to work to convey this information for my client as well as for the municipal boards and folks like everybody here that would be reviewing and analyzing this. So we can see in this architectural drawing, the bottom image is like the Main Street face, and the upper image is looking at it from the side. So you can read a little bit more of the depth that, yes, we're going up over top the roof with this glass 1-story volume and creating an outdoor kind of roof deck. But from the side, you can see it is held back fully from the left side so that we can so from Main Street, there's absolutely zero visibility from this, even driving up, and kind of working out what distance you would have to be away to see this as part of kind of the analysis here. Now, to get up to this roof, we needed to introduce stairs, we needed to introduce an elevator. So we kept all of that to the rear of the building, and you can see that kind of on the right side of the top image. And this, again, kept things minimally invasive on the property. Again, this was on a busy Main Street property where the property lines are right on the footprint of the building, with the exception of a small little triangle in the back. So how do you work with these existing sites that are constraining but still allow the some new use to be brought to the property? So just, opportunities to be creative while still falling under the criteria established by the preservation briefs is kind of the name of the game. And Brandy or Andrew, do you want to take over now to jump through the pop quiz?
Andrew, would you mind clicking through this so I can do the poll? You're muted.
Yeah, I'll take control.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so we're gonna try here to do some instant polls here. So Andrew, if you could give us just a quick overview of the context. After that, I will launch the poll and hopefully everybody can see it and we'll see what people say.
Sure. So this is say this is a proposal that comes to your HDC, in this case, Bristol and Central Square, and an existing kind of late federal, early Greek revival brick building has a proposal to construct senior housing in the rear. And they propose that it will be compatible, discernible, subservient. What do we think? If you were on the HDC, Historic District Commission, would you approve this? Do you like this design? Or just take a poll.
Let's see. It's thinking. Here we go. All right. Does everybody have a poll in front of them? Hopefully. It doesn't record your name, but we will just get a tally of the results. Yep.
I like an HDC of 1. That's
All right, we got 3.
And we do have a hand up again. Unfortunately, we are not able to. We're not going to unmute people. So
I think it's I think it's left up from before.
Oh,
Oh, interesting.
Sorry, Megan.
Weird.
all right. Well, it seems like it's unanimous. Your HDC of 3 has approved this design. All sorts of problems.
All right, you know what?
Let me see. Let me check the meeting set. We'll keep going. I suspect this may be something where only folks within the state system are being able to respond.
That's okay. You know what we can do is we can just do a thumbs up, thumbs down in the chat if we want to.
Great, let's do that.
All right, we'll do that for the next one. But it looks like here most people would say yes.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it's especially for the importance of housing in our downtowns. This is I think this is about as good as you can get. I would approve this.
All right, you want to go to the next one?
There's all these like floating thumbs. There's all sorts of like things going on our end. I see all this background response.
We practiced the poll, but technology. So
this is the Machias, Maine Congregational Church. It's if you've ever been to Down East Maine, a pretty significant building. This was an addition that was built to accommodate ADA universal accessibility to the building. What do we think?
We can get a quick yes or no in the chat. Ooh, mixed. I like the mixed. I like the
yes, good.
Yeah.
Right. Wow.
Interesting. The roofline specifically.
We tried to pick examples outside of New Hampshire for some of these instances. So we'll report back to Machias. All right, Brandy, or Jared, do you want to walk through what you think about it?
Sure. I mean, I think, people were noting roof lines, people were noting windows. It's distracting. I personally agree with that. I don't necessarily feel this is successful and that it's a little bit overstated for what it's trying to do. That it could have been addressed a little bit more simplistically without trying to mimic and match all of the styles of the existing church. A study could have been done, and maybe it was, of flat roof versus the gable, and then even within the gable itself, evaluating the pitch, and is it the right pitch we're looking at, or is it too steep? Um, so, but
I
I
think
do
this
think from a form perspective, like if we're looking at the footprint, it works really nicely with the structure that it has set back. It has the little kind of hyphen connector that appears to have still preserved the assumed historic stained glass windows. So it's not impacting those features, but integrating very delicately between them. In that aspect, I do think there's some success.
I think this is also a good example. I think somebody put in here, said, my gut is saying no. I think this is a good example of maybe where you have somebody come to you where they really did try their best to interpret your ordinance or maybe the standards, and this is their initial presentation to you, and this is a good opportunity to work with them to say, it's not quite right. I see where you're going, right? Like it looks like you're trying to make it compatible. It looks like you're trying to make it deferential. You've got the hyphen, like you're kind of checking the boxes. Like the spirit is, you're there, but it's not quite right. So this is a good opportunity to maybe workshop with them. I would have maybe asked, could it go further back on the building? Could it go on the actual back of the building? What are the needs here? In addition to some design tweaks as well.
And, to that point too, a lot of projects like this that are working to integrate accessibility, how do you integrate that without making the individuals that have to utilize that as their primary entrance feel still part of the building, and that they're not secondary, that they don't have to go to the back of the building? So I think that's definitely a critical piece to still evaluate and explore through the design process and installation.
Absolutely. Yep. I didn't even think about this as an accessibility. That flipped my brain. Good point, Jared. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is the Woodsville, New Hampshire post office.
So we're going to
In
start
National
to
Register district, but
we're going to start to kind of, I think, fly through these. Sorry, Andrew,
yeah.
because we are going to run
Nope,
short on time.
there's only a few more. Don't worry,
Okay.
everyone.
And just so you guys know, you still have about half an hour left. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. So, quick yes or no on this one. The addition is to the right, Andrew?
I'll use the fancy laser pointer.
Thank you. We don't have to discuss the ADA rant. That's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
I see a hand up again.
Yeah, I think Megan's just can't come down.
Oh, okay.
It's okay, Megan. All right. Interesting. Okay. It checks the boxes, but not lovely. So yes. Yep. Okay. Oh, I like this better than the poll. This is working out great.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So I kind of agree. I think this is I think it would probably pass muster. You see that the kind of it's probably not marble, but the white outlining of the double stack of windows entrances, it mimics without being too matchy to the original. It's smaller. The roof line is set back from the main roof line. Uses similar materials. I think it reads as an addition. It doesn't compete with the original. I'd say this is probably a 1970s, 1980s edition, and it's okay.
It's okay. It could certainly be improved. you could look at this and say, all right, we could even do a little renovation now that modifies this existing footprint and form and change out windows, maybe modify the brick infill that's within the white zone. To me, that seems a little out of place if you're trying to pick up on the white stylings of the marble of the existing openings. How do you explore that further?
This is the rear addition to the Lebanon Public Library or Carnegie Library in their Colburn Park National Register and Local Historic District. This edition, I think, was put on in 1980 something. Maybe someone in Lebanon is in the room and knows. What do we think?
The addition is to the left.
Yes, in case you, yes. This is it.
Interesting question, Noah. What do the guidelines say about adding appurtenances like window AC units to additions to historic buildings that didn't exist when the original building was constructed? They don't specifically mention, things like HVAC, although we do review HVAC because they often end up with rooftop units, things like that. So I would say, while not ideal, I look at window AC units like I look at telephone wires or electric wires and poles. They're not great to look at, but they're kind of a utility. And they're the Windows ACs are at least temporary in theory, like seasonal. So I don't know. While they might not be the prettiest things, sometimes it's just what you have until you can maybe do an integrated system of some sort. All right, good answers here. We've got yes, yes, different but respectful with mirroring shape. Would have liked some banding, but not to mimic. Okay, everybody seems to like this one so much. Pretty much.
Yeah, I agree. We agree, and obviously Lebanon agreed with you in 1980 something.
So it still stands up.
So this is in Gilmanton, also a locally regulated historic district. This is the existing historic brick house, and then this brick wing or L on the back is new, and the barn was relocated and reassembled on site. Would your historic district commission approve this?
I find it interesting that with the L edition, it's clearly stepped back from the corner of the existing brick, but why did we need to introduce the shutters here? I get the shutters to me make, especially with the brick facade to it, makes it feel that it maybe was historic. It puts a little bit of a question mark there for me. And, that goes back to one of those discernibility, not creating a false sense of history. And I feel that's a little bit ambiguous here. And maybe if the connector didn't have the shutters, for example, it might have been less questionable.
I would agree with that, and it looks like quite a few people agree too. It's like maybe a little too close.
Yeah.
I may have even gone with a different siding rather than brick. I mean, clapboard rear additions to brick buildings are not uncommon, but it would have differentiated it a little bit more than the brick. But again, does it pass muster maybe for your approval? Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I would say this is where that line gets blurred between, boy, it looks pretty and the aesthetics are nice.
Right.
Does it meet the standards and does it introduce some kind of inconsistencies with the standards? But I would be thrilled if my neighbors did this to their place instead of the palates that often build their additions. So
Agreed. Megan
Yes.
said most
Yeah.
HGCs would, yeah, agreed. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. Very
Yeah,
expensive. Also agreed.
it was very expensive. I heard. All right, so let's go to new construction and infill, kind of for the home stretch of this presentation. And we'll do a similar thing where we kind of set you up, and then we kind of do some illustrated examples, and then poll on just, I think, 3 examples. So with that, take control. Is it
I think it's
Randy?
still you.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So similarly, new construction in historic districts. I mean, we're following those things where we want them to be compatible. We want them to be maybe discernible. And again, Brandy mentioned this in the beginning. The goal of design review is to manage and thoughtfully guide change, but not prevent it. And so I think that's really important. I think we, as preservationists, we get very hung up and nervous about change. Change is inevitable, and I think if you want your historic district commission to be relevant and respected, you want to make fair decisions. So,
Fair and strong decisions, and that factors into the identity of the district itself and that community. They're all different, right? Each one has different aspects that create it uniquely its own. And so taking that into account through this analysis is also a pretty critical factor, while still allowing growth and continued use of properties is part of it.
yeah. Yep. So here, new construction, including the buildings, the driveways, parking lots, landscape improvements, and other new features should not significantly alter the character of historic district. This is a good time also to look into your ordinances and see what your ordinances mention. I mean, I know we have many ordinances that date from the 60s and are maybe more focused on use and big picture thoughts. And then maybe with development pressure recently, a proposal has come across your table and you realize, oh, we actually have no grounds to deny or to engage in conversation about this because technically it meets our ordinances. So go through your ordinances every so many years and make sure that they're up to date and they address kind of a holistic view, especially with new construction. So in this case, this is Charlestown. In 2013 or so, the Historic District Commission looked at a proposal to demolish this historic house and became a gas station. So we would say, and this was a fight. We're not picking on Charlestown, but this on many grounds does not meet infill. It should not meet infill design standards for your community, right? Boy, the pavement is wrong. The canopy gas station is wrong. The setback is wrong. The scale is wrong. So in many ways, this does not meet good infill design standards. This is an example in Portsmouth, and I have to say we have several examples of Portsmouth here because not many of our historic district commissions outside of the seacoast, like Somersworth, Dover, well, Dover doesn't have an HDC, don't have a lot of infill pressures. But in this case, and it's a terrible Google shot, I apologize, and this is not actually in a regulated district, but the historic house is set back here. And so when the lot was subdivided, the new buildings were put to the side, so at least you can keep kind of the view shed and of the historic building, and you don't block that primary elevation. And then we want to talk about, again, context and setting and landscapes. Our historic districts vary greatly in their material. So here on the left, we have Center Hillsborough. It's pastoral, it's picturesque. You have wood frame buildings in this very rural environment with stone walls. And then on the right, we have the Manchester Mill Yard and the Amoskeag housing. Very different context. You want to make sure that your ordinances actually address the context of your neighborhood. You want to think about things like density, height, setbacks, rhythm, and what kind of character you're hoping to achieve and maintain in your district. So I think increasingly the preservation world is looking at bigger picture and looking at historic landscapes. Here we have an example from Stark. Stark does not actually have a historic district commission, but in this very well photographed village, the buildings actually all have covenants on them to protect the most visible elevations of the buildings. And that helps preserve kind of the landscape setting. So in your district, if you have things like farm fields, or if you have mountain views, these are things that maybe you should think about even outside of your district, and make sure that your town or regional planning looks at things like ridge top construction. Brandy, I know you wanted to. Well, I don't know if you want to talk about archaeology, but
I don't know that we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that if you are aware that there may be a possibility of archaeological resources, that you're sensitive to that. In our office, you can always call and ask to speak to an archaeologist if you have questions.
So again, kind of summarizing those rules of thumb, you want that new construction to be compatible. You want it to be differentiated and discernible. You want that infill to speak to its time. And you want it to be sometimes subordinate, especially if you're in a really maybe a densely packed historic district. You want to think about the proximity to the historic buildings and how that new design relates. So we've got some more examples, and I think we'll just do the chat again. I don't think
I think that worked great.
Miraculously worked. Yeah, Tamara. Yeah, exactly. And Charlestown, again, is not the only one. This happened in Winchester, and the fight in Winchester actually resulted in the loss, the disbanding of their historic district commission. When a gas station demolished a historic building, it turned really messy. So frontline workers, you guys you see it all, and hats off to you. So again, we have several Portsmouth examples. And because of urban renewal, downtown Portsmouth actually ended up with a lot of parking lots. So a lot of these examples are not necessarily demolition and reconstruction. These are 60-year-old parking lots that are now being sold and redeveloped.
Thoughts on this one? It's quiet in the chat. This must be a tough one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is way better than the poll.
The scale of adjacent buildings and the site context that you're constructing in is extremely critical. It does, from the image, it looks like the buildings on the right-hand side of the street are that kind of 3 to 4-ish story type of approach, and so that might work. And now we're then transitioning to the left in a little bit smaller scale. So, how does that evaluate the roof? Again, what are the forms it's picking up on? This reads more mansard. It's hard to tell if that's true on the right or if it's more like what we're seeing on the left hand, where it's a gable with dormers. And with today's construction, and Brandy, you had mentioned it earlier, rooftop mechanical units are kind of the name of the game, especially in urban settings. Where do you put the equipment? And so this very well could be an opportunity where they tried to create flat roof to get mechanicals up top. It's hard to say.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I would say
cool.
this is this is probably a good example too of when zoning and local ordinances match each other, right? So
Yeah.
zone is allowed for ground floor, mixed use building, ground floor retail. You can go right up to the curb and really fit the downtown space. So I would imagine Portsmouth has some modern parking standards. So yeah, I would think if anyone, I see Laura from Somersworth. I think Somersworth would be happy with this in their historic district, right? Laura can say yes or no. Yeah. Okay. This is in downtown Manchester in their historic district in the Mill Yard. This is one of the first new constructions that Manchester got to review in, I don't know, 30 years or something. So this was a real test of Manchester's economic vitality and downtown's appeal. What do we? Did I say it's a hotel? It's a hotel. What do we? It's also replaced a parking lot, which had replaced, probably a warehouse or a mill building.
I have thoughts on this one, but I'm going to wait until we get to an
Brandy.
answer.
Oh, well, I think either people are real True by Hilton fans and they don't want to say anything, or they really like it. Brandy, I'd say just go for it. Start the conversation.
I think this is an interesting one. I think it's tough. So maybe that's why it's a little quiet in the chat. But I would agree with that. Wouldn't want to see it. Yeah, keep it later. All right, here we go. Hang on. Let's see. Don't love it, don't hate it. Yep, it's fine. Better articulation. I would agree with that. Better than a parking lot. Yep. Mixed feelings. Need more street view to compare. That's a good point. I'm assuming that this is in the, mostly surrounded by mills. Obviously, we can see a newer building to the right. But I feel like it's interesting because again, it kind of checks the boxes in that you've got this rhythmic facade of windows. You've got the brick. There's some horizontal emphasis there, which we can often see in mill buildings. This blue overhang here looks really funky. The blue is throwing me off, but it actually kind of looks like on a mill building that could be a loading dock, just a covered loading dock. So it looks funky, but it's actually probably what I would say the most appropriate part of the design. So I think it's a mixed bag. I don't think it's the greatest building in the world. I definitely think it could have been more compatible personally. But I also think in a funky way it does the thing.
I think I would only add a basic comment that brand standards are not forever. So this beautiful sky blue, teal, whatever we want to call it, may not, be around forever. And so that could, changing that color would change the entire appearance of this space.
100% agreed.
Yeah. And that might change opinion a little bit too of that component.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I'm usually one of the biggest I'm pretty staunchly anti-regulating paint colors. But in this instance, it's really throwing me off. Yeah.
Let's go to a more jarring example. This is also Portsmouth, former parking lot, turned redeveloped lot. Is this differentiated enough for all of us?
I think, Laura, is this your building?
Okay.
The inside out ship. Oh, interesting. I love that.
Yeah, I'm going to say this one. I mean, it's boy, it certainly is a building of its time, and I think it's nice to have architecture that evolves, and it's like the Cybertruck of the architecture world, especially in Portsmouth.
I think buildings like this are tough. I think, again, you've got, you don't want to stifle creativity. This is certainly creative. Like, we'll give it that. But at the same time, there is something to be said for its impact on the district. If you're going to do something not super compatible, then I do feel like you should do something that kind of stands on its own and everybody knows the building. And I think that was achieved here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then we're going to kind of take the pendulum the entire other way. And this is Canaan Street, which is a residential historic district with houses mostly from the Federal through Greek Revival era. And they've had a few new buildings constructed. And specifically, their design guidelines say that new building sites shall be no larger than those prevalent within the district, and new buildings shall be consistent in mass, form, shape, and design from the architectural attributes of existing structures built between 1780 and 1850. So these are two brand new houses. Is your historic district, if this comes across your table, are you happy?
Wait, what was that time? You said there was a specific timeline?
Yeah, they specifically want designs that read between 1780 and 1850.
Okay. Yeah, I would not have guessed these were new either.
Mm-hmm.
And I think interesting. Yeah. I think it's interesting and I think important to note that, while we do have the standards that, most of us use and or common philosophies that most of us use, it is up to the community to decide what exactly they're looking for. And some communities do want essentially, replicas. And that is their, that's what they've decided is best for their community. And it's not up to us to tell them whether that's good or bad. So, on a philosophical, going back to Andrew's earlier comment about, these kind of academic conversations that, they can get pretty in the weeds sometimes. And I think that, going back to that, we would all say, yeah, these don't look differentiated whatsoever. So maybe they don't meet the standards. But if that's what the community wants, that's, it's their community. They know it best.
Right. Yeah, I would say I would be happy if these were built in my neighborhood. I also think there's a somewhat of an argument. There are some like ranch houses in 1950s houses on Canaan Street that are now significant in their own right. They were not 50 years old when the district was created, but they now would be. And I would just say, if I were on the Canaan Historic District Commission, and maybe John is in the chat, is there imperative from the HDC to include housing stock that can be built smaller and more affordably for your historic district that still blends into the neighborhood and doesn't kind of mimic houses from 150 years ago? But okay. With that, I think we'll just, we've got 2 minutes, right, Noah? So speed round of questions.
Yes, this was great. Yeah, the break's supposed to begin at 10:15. I guess we can go a couple minutes over. Brandy, Andrew, and Jared, if you're available, if folks do have questions.
Sure, we can take a few questions. I want to thank everybody for, while we're waiting for a question, just for participating in the chat. I know sometimes it can be a little scary to pipe in with opinions on things. Andrew and Jared and I are probably pretty used to having opinions on things like this. So thank you all for doing that. I think it was really fun and worked out better than the poll. So, I'm going to thank the technological glitches today.
And I will actually, before folks are thinking of questions, Andrew, my oversight, Andrew, Brandy, and Jared, I don't think any of your email or contact information in here.
No.
I think
Oh,
we may
yeah.
have put it somewhere else, but do you guys mind just putting your email addresses or however best way for folks if they do have questions or want to follow up afterwards, if you don't mind?
Sure.
And we do have a question from Tamara Golden. What resources are available for a community working on establishing design guidelines?
That's a really good question. We
point.
see a lot of communities working on that right now. I think I'm a huge proponent of design guidelines, especially illustrated ones. I think that they can offer a lot of transparency and predictability for applicants in a local historic district. So I would say right now, the resources my office can provide are one, pointing you to known, updated, and recent design guidelines that we may have funded with our certified local government program. We've funded several of them in recent years. Um, and I think connecting you with other communities that have done that work is one of the best resources that we can provide you with. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to start that discussion. Another thing to note is that if you are a certified local government, you may be eligible for a grant through our office. So if you are a certified local government and you have not heard from me, please contact me, because there are communities that I do have trouble getting in touch with, and maybe their contact info just hasn't been updated.
Great. And Brandy, is there a certain page on the DHR website
Yeah.
that you could
Yep.
put the
Let me
link
pop
to
that
that
in
would
there. Thank
thank you.
you. Andrew, I don't know if you want to speak to Preservation Alliance at all.
Yeah, again, we're going through a transition where we're training some new field service folks to answer these questions and provide examples. I would say, do you think Exeter, Julie, do you think Exeter is the newest design guidelines created in New Hampshire, has the newest design guidelines? And Exeter is different than Charlestown and the buildings, but it might be worth it to approach other HDCs and just start compiling their design guidelines, because they can be extensive. But actually, even Claremont has some good design guidelines. Some of them are, I think, even 2 or 3 decades old, but at least it helps with the kind of get you thinking about the scaffolding of what that document could look like.
I also want to just reply to Laura. Somersworth is doing a camp on June 7th. For those of you who aren't familiar with camp is the Commission Assistance and Mentorship Program put on by the National Association of Preservation Commissions. If you're not a member of NAPC, it's like $50 maybe, depending on your population, to join, and all of your members get membership. They've got great education resources. Check them out. Sorry, I hope that's okay to plug, Noah. And then
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I actually got an email yesterday, the day before, from a planner in Somersworth saying, please publicize. So I just put the registration
Awesome.
link for that in the
Awesome. Thank
chat.
you.
So there you
Yeah,
go.
these camp events are great. They have folks come in from all over the country to do different sessions and different topics, and this is free. This is Somersworth is inviting folks to attend. So please go ahead and do that if you can. This is funded by the Certified Local Government Program as well. We gave them a grant to hold this event. So we believe really strongly in the trainings and the education that the camp provides.
I'll say I'm trying to put my email into the chat, but I wonder if while I have control, I can't engage with the chat.
That would be
Or am I
news to me. Teams is making changes on functionality on the daily, but I don't know. Do you want us to put your personal one now, or just continue with your NHPA one?
Yeah, we can do my AC at NH Preservation, and you'll get an automated response if you do email me. But I check that email.
Okay, great. Well, I'm gonna put this in the chat. We are almost at 10:20. I do want to give people a couple minutes to stretch their legs before the next session, and then also get set up with our next set of speakers. I want to thank first I want to thank Brandy, Andrew, and Jared. This was a really fascinating session. And I also want to thank, as you said, Brandy, for all the vigorous audience participation, attendee participation. So we are going to take a 10-minute break now. Actually, yes, it says 15, but now 10-minute break. And we'll resume our next session at 10:30, which is called Will This Building Make Money? I suspect some of you may have just been on this session because this was the one historic preservation session we were doing. I do encourage folks to stick around if you're able to for the next session or beyond. Some really interesting housing sessions in this track rest of the day. And thank you all. Again, thank you, Brandy, Andrew, and Jared.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Thanks for all your work around the state.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Noah.